Learn Create Sew. Today we're going to be making an axolotl plush. This is a quick, fun project. It doesn't take that much fabric, and there aren't too many details. It can usually be completed in a couple hours. It's fun to make this plush using a variety of colors. Let's go ahead and get started. The axolotl measures approximately 12 inches across with the gills, about 8 inches across without the gills, and it's about 6.5 or 7 inches tall. To make the axolotl, you're going to want plush fabric in 3 colors. I'm using fleece to make this plush, but you could also use Minky. Minky I haven't tested, so it might stretch a little bit different, giving you a slightly different shape for your axolotl. For the axolotl, I'm using a light colored for the body, arms, and legs, and I'm using a darker color for the gills and white for the bottom front. For the plush, you're also going to need some safety eyes. These come with little backs. These are 16mm safety eyes with some decorative spots on them that I picked up on Amazon. You'll also want some black embroidery floss. You'll also want a good amount of polyfil for this project. Usually takes about twice as much as I think. You can pick up the free pattern for this project on my website, which is linked in the description below. You'll notice that some of the pattern pieces have a solid line with a dotted line, and some of the pieces only have a dotted line. The dotted line represents where you sew, and the solid line would represent where you cut the fabric. So on this back piece here, I'd cut out the paper pattern on the solid line and cut out the fabric the same. When you cut out the fabric, don't cut out the dart area. Again, this is a dotted line, so that's where you're gonna sew. The pieces that only have a dotted line, we're actually going to sew before we cut. So for example, this pattern piece here shows where I'm gonna sew this piece, and so I'm actually gonna trace it onto the fabric and sew first before I cut it out. I'm going to start by cutting out the pieces that are exactly the same as the pattern piece. So that's going to be the front bottom, the front top, the back, the bottom, the tail, and the tail accents. One thing to remember when you do cut out these pieces is that the center line also represents your grain line. So that line should be going the same direction as the selvage on your fabric. To cut out my pieces, I like to trace the pattern piece onto the fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm using an air erase marker because I'm going to be doing this all in one sitting. So it's okay. So I'm not going to have to worry about it fading away. If I was going to do this over the course of multiple days, instead of using an air erase marker, I might use a fine point Sharpie. I do like to use a Sharpie that kind of coordinates with the color of my fabric, so I'd probably use a teal Sharpie. If you do choose to use a Sharpie, do be careful. You want to make sure that you're drawing on the wrong side of the fabric, not the right side of the fabric. And you want to make sure that you draw lightly so that it doesn't accidentally bleed through to the right side. When you're tracing, you also want to mark key points. So I'm going to mark where each of these triangles are. That's going to be the position of the arms and legs. And you're also going to want to mark your 2 darts if you do the darts, and you're going to want to mark the center. The darts are optional. You don't have to do the darts if you don't want to. I kind of like the shape it provides, but it's a subtle detail and you don't really need them if you don't want them. I'm going to make sure my markings extend into the seam allowance of my pattern piece so that they'll still be there when I cut it out. And this pattern has seam allowance included, so I'm just going to cut directly on the line. When you get to the darts, the dart lines that you sew in, don't cut those down. That's where you sew, again, for the darts. So don't cut out the triangle portion for the dart. Just cut around the edge of the shape. So now my back piece is ready, and I'm going to repeat the same thing with the bottom front, making sure I mark the key points with the center and the position of the arms and legs. And after I get those cut out, I'll come back. The top front piece of fabric is cut on the solid line, just like your pattern. You do want to make sure when you cut that you transfer your important markings. So you'll transfer your center line to make center marks, as well as the gill placement lines here on the sides. And I like to poke holes in my pattern piece so I can make dots for the center of the eye as well as the ends of the two eyebrow. If you are planning to do the darts, make sure you transfer that marking on your pattern. Do make sure that these marks are on the wrong side of your fabric. The bottom is also cut exactly on the same line as the pattern. And when you cut that out, you're going to want to mark the center vertical and the center horizontal. And again, make those marks on the wrong side of your fabric. The front bottom is cut from white fleece. It's cut exactly on the line of the pattern and include your markings, center, arms, and legs. You'll have 3 pieces for the tail, 2 from the main tail piece. This is going to be the top and bottom of the tail, and then 1 out of the accent color fabric, which will give a little decoration to the edge of the tail. The gills, arms, and legs are not cut to shape. The gills, arms, and leg patterns are showing you the sew line, and so you'll simply trace the pattern piece onto the fabric and we'll sew it first and then cut at a later time. When you do so, you do have 2 layers of fabric here, so my fabric is folded. I've cut out all of my pattern pieces for the project and I'm ready to get started. You can visit my website for the free cut layout if needed. I'm going to start by sewing the gills. I'm going to sew around the outside of the shape, the curved edge, and I'm going to leave this side section open as indicated in the pattern. So these 2 curves here will stay open, and I'm going to sew along this outer curve and that outer curve, and I'm going to take my time, go slow, and try and stick as close to that line as I possibly can. I'm going to place a pin in the center of the gill to hold it in place while I sew. You'll notice I'm going to stop with my needle down and turn frequently. That's going to help me keep the shape of the curves. When I get to the dip, I'll put my needle down, lift my foot, and turn. I finished stitching around the curves and I'm ready to cut this out. Here's my original trace line from my pattern piece, and the others have my stitches on it. This section that I didn't sew, the one that remained open, I'm going to cut a 1/4 inch away from that. So I'm going to give myself a little guideline so I don't forget. And I'm also going to cut a 1/4 inch around the rest of the piece. And now I'm going to clip my curves. So right in this little section here and here, I'm going to clip down towards that valley. You want to take care, make sure you don't cut your stitches. And I'm going to cut a few clips around the edge of the curve. Now this is fleece, it's probably not super necessary, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. And I want to make sure this turns to be a nice shape. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a few clips. And I'll repeat that for the other. So I have the gills sewn, and now I'm going to go ahead and flip these right side out. Take care to make sure they're fully turned. I usually just stick my finger down in the edge there and push out. Then if you would like to, you can do some decorative stitching on the gills. I've included this on the pattern piece if you'd like to see how I did it, but it really doesn't matter. You can get creative and stitch as you like. I usually do on each gill 3 kind of slender football shapes. So for this you do want to use a marker that will vanish because this is on the front of the plush. So I'm going to start down here at the seam line, kind of in the center of this first dip, and I'm going to go up into the center of the peak up here. Let me see if I can get you a little closer view, 1 second. So I'm going to start down here at this first peak, and I'm going to start in the center and go up to the middle here, and I'm just going to draw a slightly curved line and then one that curves slightly the other way. And then I'm going to do the same for each peak, so I'm going to go into the middle of this peak here. And then the same on the bottom one. You can see how the little football shapes kind of fan out as you go around. And I'll do the same on the other. Remember, you do want mirror images. Okay, so I've got my marks done, and now I'm going to head to the sewing machine and stitch those in place. As I sew these decorative stitches, I'm going to start at the side edge here that's open, and I'm going to start here, sew down to the peak, put my needle down, turn, and then sew back up to the edge again, and I'm going to do that for all 3, and then I'll do the second gill. I've stitched all the decorations, and now I'm going to trim my threads. The last thing you'll want to do to prep the gills is to do a few clips in the seam allowance. So this part's going to be extended and visible on the plush, and this is our seam allowance here. When I sew this, it does have to flip a little the other direction. So in the seam allowance, I'm just going to do a few 1/8 inch clips. These are really tiny. You don't want to clip any of your stitches. Keep them nice and small. And if you prefer, you don't have to do this. I just like the little bit of extra stretch it provides, but you don't want to accidentally end up with a hole. So keep them tiny. Four or 5 is probably sufficient. And now my gills are ready, and I'm going to set these aside for later. Now I'm ready to do the arms and legs. The arms and legs you're going to do in a very similar manner. For the arms and legs, you want to leave the top straight section open, and you're just going to sew along the sides. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew along those side and bottom curves, leaving the top little straight edge open to turn. The arms and legs have been sewn, and now I'm just going to trim around the edges. I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch from the open edge. And then about 3/16 away from the sewn edges. And then if you'd like to, you can do a few clips along those curves. Again, be careful, make sure you don't clip your stitches. And now it's time to turn these right side out. They are a little tiny, so it can be a little tricky. My favorite tool to use is a small pair of hemostats. I think these are 5-inch hemostats. And I'm just going to poke them down at the bottom there. Grab the little end inside, clip it closed, and gently wiggle that over. And then use my closed hemostats to poke out the curves. That's my favorite way to do it. If you don't have hemostats, you can just gently grab each side and use your thumb to poke the end in. And then you can use a tool like this purple thing here. Gently wiggle that down. Then again, poke out your curves. So that's with the purple thing. You can also use tweezers. I'm going to be using the blunt end, so grab each side, pull it apart. Poke the end in with your thumb so it makes like a little cave in there. You can put the rounded end of your tweezers right in there. And then gently wiggle it down. And then use that rounded end of the tweezers to poke out the ends. So whichever tools you have available to you are fine. I'm going to use my hemostats. Make sure they're fully turned and then you're ready to go. You should have 2 arms and 2 legs, and we'll set these aside until later. We're ready to construct the front of the plush. Make sure you have the front top and bottom pieces ready. Right now I'm looking at the wrong side of the fabric so I can see all of my markings. The markings for the darts, placements of the gills, placement of the arms, placement of the legs, and centers. And on the top piece I can also see where the eyes and eyebrows go. To begin, we're going to flip our pieces right side over. So we're looking at the right side of the fabric. This is usually the one that's a little plushier. We're going to sew this seam together. And this is going to look a little funny as you begin because when you sew, you have to sew right sides together. So this is going to flip up like this. And you want to match up the center front on both pieces. And place a pin. So the raw edges of the fabric should be touching. And then you also want to align the 2 ends. So I'm just going to move this to align with this corner and pin. And I'm going to move this one to align with this corner and pin. Once you have those key points marked, then you can pin the rest of the section. So because our fabric is stretchy, the fleece will move to fit. You do want to evenly space it. You don't want it to be all stretched out or anything. Then I like to kind of just fan out those in-between sections and put a few more pins. Make sure it's laying flat and there aren't any puckers or pleats. I find it usually aligns pretty good. The edges of the top and bottom should align all the way across. And now I'm going to go ahead and sew along the pinned edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. The two pieces are now connected. Check to make sure everything lines up well. I like to just finger press this seam open. So I'm just going to take my finger and the heat of my hand and press this open. Next, I'm going to sew the darts. Sewing the darts is optional, so if you don't want the darts, you don't have to have them. I'm going to start right here on this dot. I'm just going to put a pin right at that point of the dart, the peak here. And I'm going to fold my fabric right side together, and I'm going to line up the legs of the triangle and put another pin. I'm going to make sure it goes through the front and back of that triangle. And now I'm going to go ahead and sew the dart. That dart's now sewn in place, and I'm going to repeat that 3 more times. Once for the other side of the front, and then again twice for the back piece. I've completed the darts on the front and the back piece. You'll notice that it curves up just a bit now. So next I'm going to add the details to the face. I'm going to start by inserting these safety eyes. You want to be really careful to make sure that your hole is not too big when you insert the eyes. You don't want them to accidentally fall out. So I'm going to look at my little markings that I put on the back of the front piece. These are the markings here for the eyebrow, and that's the eye, eyebrow, eye. It's the interior bottom dot that will be the center of the eye. And I'm just going to take a teeny tiny pair of scissors and just poke right there. These scissors are really sharp, so I might not even need to clip. I might be able to just poke through. And if that doesn't work, I'll do a teeny tiny clip, only maybe 1/8 of an inch, if that. I'm going to do the same on the other. Again, you want to keep it really small because fleece stretches. And then I'm going to take my safety eye and I'm going to poke it through that hole. And secure the back. And then the other eye. And secure the back. And if your eyes have the little decoration, you may want to turn them so that they're facing the direction you want. I kind of like the big dot down towards the bottom. So I've got my embroidery floss and I'm ready to do the eyebrows. I'm going to tie a knot at one end. I do want to make sure it's a pretty good size knot. Don't want it to slide through the fleece. And I'm going to go to the back side again, and I'm going to go in through one dot for the eyebrow, and then up and out through the other dot of the eyebrow. And then just pull it through. You may have to wiggle a bit. And then I'm going to tie a knot. So I'm going to make a loop, go through the loop, and I'm going to use my thumb here to make sure my knot stays down. I don't want my knot to end up somewhere up here. I want my knot to be right next to where my yarn came out. So I'm just going to keep that knot down there. And then I'm going to do that one more time, so make a loop, go through the loop, oh, my knot ended up a little high, let's try that one more time. There we go. And now I'm going to trim off those ends. You don't want them to stay too long. Depending on how thick your fabric is, it may or may not matter. This fleece is actually pretty thin, so I don't want huge black threads on the backside. So I'm going to keep those kind of small, about 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to repeat the process for the other eyebrow. And there's the face. If you want to add the accent details to the tail, you're going to start by aligning these 2 points. You're looking for the point where the seam allowances intersect. So I'm going to mark that point here and here. And I'm going to start by aligning the pieces there. This piece is laying right side up and this piece is laying right side down, and I'm going to turn this one so it looks like it's upside down. And I'm going to put my pin through this point. Notice I have done a little clip here at the top to allow my piece to turn. And I'm going to put that through this point right here. And I'm going to pin that in place. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn this edge to align it with the side. And then repeat for the other side. You will have a little triangle at the top that does not have the accent fabric, and that is to be expected. Now I'm going to base this in place with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure that the point at the peak has been sewn and you don't want to end up with a hole right there. Lay this piece right side up. Take your second tail piece and place it right side down on top of it. Put a few pins to secure it in place. And then we're going to go and we're going to sew this together. I'm going to put this piece on the bottom and I'm going to sew exactly on top of my previous stitches. Now that's sewn, I'm going to clip the top off to eliminate some of that bulk. Again, you don't want to cut your stitches. You can add a couple clips in here to help it turn if you like. And then go ahead and flip it right side out. And so I can see that mine turned out a little strange right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to trim that to be the way I like it. There we go, I like that a little better. And there's my tail. I generally don't stuff the tail or arms and legs on the axolotl, but you definitely could if you wanted to. So if you'd like to, you can put a little stuffing in there and then baste it closed with a seam allowance that's a little less than 1/4. Now we're ready to add all of the embellishments. To start, I'm going to begin with the arms and legs. So look for your markings that you added previously. So here's the mark for the arm right there. So I'm going to take one arm piece, align it with that mark, and pin in place. Find my mark. Align the arm piece. And pin. Find the marks for the legs. And now I'm going to base these in place with a seam allowance that's just a little bit smaller than 1/4. So the arms and the legs are attached now, and next I'm going to attach the gills. So this is the right side and this is the right side. So when they're done, I want them to be like this. I'm going to find my marks. The marks indicate where the bottom of the gill should go. So here's one mark. And here's the other. So when you put the gills on, you want it to sew it right sides together. So it's going to go this way and this way. Align the bottom of the gill with the pin. Right sides touching, pin in place. Now because we put all these little clips here, it should fan out and curve this direction. We're just going to align it with the edge of the top front. And those little clips should allow it to fan out a bit. Okay, and let's repeat on the other side. So I now have the gills pinned in place, and I'm going to go ahead and base those with a seam allowance that's just a little bit smaller than 1/4. When I do sew these, I do want the gills on top. That way I can help adjust the fabric as I need to. I did sew over a lot of pins in that step. You probably shouldn't. It's really not a safe thing to do. You could break a needle and that needle could fly off and hit you or something like that. So it is best to remove the pins before you sew over them to protect yourself and to protect your machine. So you just saw my bad sewing habits. Okay. Now that I've got the front piece done, I'm ready to start on the back. So I'm going to take the back piece and I'm going to lay it right side up, and now we're going to attach the tail. If you do want to stuff the tail, do it now. Right side of the accent fabric touching the right side of this. And then align the center of the tail with the center of the body back. Pin. Now we're going to baste in place with a little less than 1/4 inch. The front and back pieces are complete and we're ready to put them together. So lay the front piece right side up, lay the back piece right side down on top of it, align your two corners, align the center top. If you made the darts, I like to align the darts next, align the seams, and push the darts in opposite directions. This can be a little bulky, so if you prefer, you can use a clip instead of a pin to hold these in place. And I do like to make these mirrors, so the one on the front side I have going towards the center, the one on the front I have going towards the center. Now that I have the main points secured, I'm going to pin everywhere else along the curved edge. This bottom edge is going to stay open so that I don't need to worry about yet. I'm just going to go along the sides. Try not to stretch your fabric as you align it. Be sure to keep this seam open. Okay, it's all secure and pinned, and now I'm going to sew around the curved edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Got it all sewn, and we're ready to flip. Looking pretty cute. Check to make sure everything looks okay. And if it all looks good, go ahead and flip it back. And now let's align the bottom. For the bottom piece, you're going to place it around the bottom of the plush here, so it looks kind of like a bag right now. And with the bottom piece, you're going to align the 2 horizontal center marks with the side seams and the 2 vertical center marks with the front and back center. So let's go ahead and do that. So right sides together. And then go ahead and pin everywhere in between. When I put my pins in the base, I do like to go in and out of the base. So when I sew, I want most of the pin to be on the bottom. So the ball side of the pin ends up on the side where the base is. This will make the next step easier if you do that. Make sure the tail and legs end up inside the plush. You shouldn't see them at this point. They're going to be sandwiched inside. Okay, as we stitch the bottom, we have to leave an opening to turn. I like to leave the opening on the back side. So I'm going to leave the opening next to the tail. I want to actually sew the tail in place. I don't want to have to slip stitch where the tail is. So I'm going to go to just beyond. So I'm going to use a red pin and a green pin to help me know where to start and stop. So I'm going to start sewing just past the side seam here. So I'm going to start here. This is about 1/2 inch away from the side seam. And then I'm going to leave it open until about 1/2 inch away from the tail. So I'll stop here. So this is going to be my starting point, and this is going to be my stopping point, and this right here will be my opening to turn. When I sew, I like to sew with this on the bottom so you can see with it all pinned that it's a nice oval. And pinning with the pin on the base side helps it to lay flat so it can kind of stand up. So I'm going to sew with it standing like this. So I'm going to start at my green pin, sew around the base, and stop at my red pin, and I sew with this part on top so I can move it out of the way as I need to. I don't want to end up with any gathers or pleats. So let's head to the sewing machine and let's sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you can see how I have the plush standing on its base. And I'm going to use my purple thing to help me keep my fabric flat so that it's not curling. Make sure you backstitch. Here's my side seam right there. I'm going to make sure that stays open. Use my purple thing to help me. If you have a stiletto, that works too. You can also use the side or point of a corner turner. You just don't want to get your fingers too close in there because we don't want any sewn finger accidents. So just go slow, take your time, and adjust this material as you need to. And there's my red pin, so I know it's time to stop. Make sure everything looks okay, and carefully flip through your opening. Looks like I've got some threads that need to be clipped. So let's go ahead and stuff. Make sure your polyfill is light and fluffy. If you notice that it's dense and clumpy, you may want to fluff it out first. Just take it and tear it into tiny little sections so it's light and fluffy before putting it in your plush. You want to stuff it pretty firmly. If you don't, it tends to get kind of a weird shape next to the gills. This is also a good time to shape your fleece. I've noticed that a lot of times fleece will do what it wants to. And so you have to kind of take the time to stretch it and push it into the shape you want. Otherwise, sometimes it can look lumpy and weird even if you've sewn it just perfectly. Once you have it stuffed as you like it, it's time to close the opening. Grab a hand sewing needle and some coordinating thread and slip stitch it closed. With fleece, I like to double thread my needle. Let's go ahead and slip stitch it closed along that 1/4 inch stitch line. If you need to know how to slip stitch, I'll link a tutorial in the description below. Tie your knot and hide your end tails inside the plush. The axolotl tail is really nice. It lets the plush stand up on its own, so that is a bonus for that tail feature. Clip any loose threads and your axolotl is finished. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Until next time, happy sewing!